It's getting near dawn. The lights close the time. I'll soon be with you.
It's really nice to be able to tell you other facts here in the day for this kind of music. Now this is Jethro Tull one more time. Good Anderson there on the flutes. We know this group could be the biggest attraction since the Stones. Now this is a T-Bone Walker blues.
I said we called it Stormy Monday.
They're coming on stage, Mark. They're about ready to start. There you go.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's very nice to see you. Thank you for coming along.
make it some noise. Don't be concerned. All right, joining us today, Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. Glad you could make it in today. My first question is a question that has plagued me as a radio guy for years, and I'm wondering if it doesn't have the same effect on you. Do people come up to you and call you Jethro to this day? Does that happen a lot?
It doesn't happen a lot, no. It's always happened a little, but only a little, thankfully.
There's people constantly, is that guy Jethro Tull playing? So I'm just curious if people assume that you are Jethro Tull.
Well, there is that assumption from, I guess, people who are not very knowledgeable about the band, or maybe don't have any records, but I think most people, when they... I mean, the first thing I do if I buy an album, and I bought one yesterday, is to look through and see the names of the guys playing on the record.
Right.
If it's a band, then I want to know who they are. And I think most people are kind of a little curious, at least, when they spend their hard-earned money to sort of find out who is who. So, I mean, most people know who I am, and that Jethro Tull is a band identity, but, you know, there is the odd airline pilot who says, oh, was Mr. Tull on board?
Right.
And, you know, it happens, but no more or less than it ever did.
It's not that common.
It's a very mild irritant. It doesn't really worry me too much. My wife doesn't like being called Mrs. Tull.
Right.
She gets a little upset with that one.
What is the origin of the name Jethro Tull? We know it's the agriculturalist or 18th century, the guy who invented the seed drill. But what brought that into the realm of rock and roll? What made you want to use that as the name of a band?
Well, the name has nothing to do with me or any past or present members of Jethro Tull. It was a name, one of many names given to us on a weekly basis. When we first went down to London and tried to make our name, any name, playing around the blues clubs in the south of England, our agent would give us a different name every week because we weren't very good, and the only way we could get rebooked into the clubs was to pretend to be somebody different. Because there was a finite number of places you could play, so we would show up every 3 or 4 weeks under a new name and try again.
Yeah.
And we just happened to be called Jethro Tull. He was, I think, a history student at university, so he knew about this character Jethro Tull, who was an 18th century agriculturalist, and just thought it sounded like a good name. And one day we turned up at the Marquee Club and we were called Jethro Tull, and that was the name that stuck because it was on that particular occasion that we were asked to become a resident band at the Marquee. And the Marquee was the famous starting point for virtually anybody and everybody out of the 60s and 70s that you ever heard of from Britain. I mean, the Marquee Club was where you really had to make it. Marquee Club was where Jimi Hendrix went to try and make his name. But everybody started there. Stones, Zeppelin, The Who, Jethro Tull. Well, actually, The Who, come to think of it, they actually made their name at a different club, but the Marquee was far and away the important one. So to get a residency meant you were actually now on the hunting trail. You could actually perhaps find fame and fortune.
So in the early days of the formation of the band, the big goal was to play the Marquee in London.
The big goal was to be accepted at the Marquee, because from that acceptance would come hopefully some, you know, journalistic interest. You would find yourself in the papers. You might, you know, spin off from the Marquee into other venues. You know, if you were a resident band there, it gave you some status, some cachet in the world of then underground blues and progressive rock music. And I mean, it was a great place to go. You could walk in there, you know, even on a Thursday, and maybe see 3 acts on the bill, any one or maybe 2 of which would be almost household names even then. I mean, still bands like Traffic were playing, and you know, the early incarnations of groups like Led Zeppelin. You know, so I mean, it's a really good place to be, a good place to go and hang out. And if you were a resident band, you were able to hang out for free. You didn't have to buy tickets.
Right.
On my nights off, I would go there and watch my peer group performing, and it was extremely exciting. I mean, they were great days.
Who were some of your favorite performers in those days?
Well, I mean, Joe Cocker, for example. I mean, when he was kind of starting off there, he was tremendous. He was a very, very animated, very powerful performer, and still at the time relatively compos mentis. And he was really good. Bands like Traffic, Spooky Tooth, you know, there was King Crimson were fairly regular people who appear there, and a great band called The Nice, who were a great favourite of mine. It had Keith Emerson playing keyboards,
right.
and that later sort of dissolved, but quickly became the Emerson, Lake and Palmer phenomenon of the over-the-top 70s. Separate limo each.
Right. A little decadence, you gotta love that. At what point in your life did you think, I'm gonna be a musician, this is what I want to do?
Well, I toyed with the idea probably when I was about 15 or 16, that seemed like an attractive possibility, but pedantic realities of earning a living got the better of me, and I first of all tried to become a journalist, and then I tried to become a policeman. I ended up going to art school, which was a way of postponing the decision.
Right.
But like so many people, I don't know how it is now, but certainly back then, I mean, everybody seemed to have come into rock music out of art school. I mean, Pete
Right.
Townsend, Ray Davis, I mean, it's just almost Jimmy Page. I mean, all these guys were at art school. Somehow art school was a breeding ground for music. I guess the slightly the atmosphere of art school, the creative feel that was about, combined with a degree of discipline, you know, meant that you found music as a very ready option, as a way of doing something far more powerful, far more immediate, and far more easy to find a willing audience than to find interested spectators for your carefully contrived pictorial art. And music being so quick, you know, this is the great thing about it. You know, you have an idea, it can be up and running in minutes or hours at the most, whereas in the painterly arts, you're talking about things that require usually a larger time frame to get them to the point where they are dry enough to touch.
And there was a great energy at that period of time with the Beatles and the Stones and all the rock and roll world. Were you swept up in that? Did the glamour get in your eye?
Well, I was still at school when the Beatles, I mean, I was, I guess, 14 or something when the Beatles came on the scene, and I guess 15 when the Stones came along, 16 maybe. The Stones were probably the biggest single influence in terms of demonstrating that there was life out there beyond pop music, because the Beatles were always seen as being a little bit, you know, the cute Fab Four, and very much in their early days were a young teen phenomenon, whereas the Stones had a little bit more of musical substance to them. So the Stones were the ones that probably would have influenced me more in terms of the British bands. But my major influences at the time were really Black American urban blues, the mainly Chess record label stuff, you know. That was the thing that really kind of got me motivated into music. And by the time I was 18, I think I decided that I would try to make music some kind of a career, however short-lived that might be. I always felt I could go back to college after a couple of years and not have lost too much time. But music somehow just kept going on in my life. So
I imagine you never thought that you'd be celebrating your 25th anniversary with a tour and the spectacle of Jethro Tull.
Well, not in the first 2 or 3 years, no. I mean, I really felt that, I mean, if you made it past your first album, then, you know, you were already in a minority. If you got onto albums 2, 3, and 4, you were, you know, pretty unusual. And if you were still becoming, or your success was still growing at that point, there was every reason maybe to believe that there was some kind of a career there. I mean, bear in mind, Jethro Tull only enjoyed a brief flurry of popularity above and beyond its more normal level in, say, the years 72 to 75. In the US anyway. At that point, you know, for that period of time, we were almost a fashionable band to go and see, you know, the kind of one of the bands to go and see at Madison Square Garden or wherever it might be. Whereas before that, we'd been already popular for, you know, certainly 4 years in many countries of the world, but at a more comfortable level. It's just that there were that tricky time, 72, 73, 74 particularly, where we could almost have become major stars in the showbiz tradition. And we had a manager back then who really wanted to shoot for the moon. He wanted us to go all the way, and he and I fell out really because I didn't want to do the things he wanted us to do. I didn't want to be so successful in a commercial sense. I always felt that I'd come into the business as a musician, and to enjoy life as a musician, you've got to have a little bit of freedom to make mistakes, freedom to try some different things, freedom to play around with musical styles, and being a rock star wasn't what it was about. It certainly isn't now. I just think of myself as a working musician, and I think of it as my job. And I'm lucky to have a job that a lot of the time is enjoyable to do. But it is a job, and I'm glad to be working. I mean, we all need a job.
We all do.
You know, people who don't have jobs are, are either people you really feel sorry for if they have no job and no money, and if they have no job because they have a lot of money, then we may not feel quite as sorry for them, but they're usually rather pitiful sort of time wasters. There's a lot of people born that way, with just more money than sense, and who just never feel the need to really apply themselves. And I think it's a great sadness. I feel a job is really important. Whether
That's
it's
a nice touch.
Yeah, whether it's interior redecorating or
yeah, that would be an
whatever it might
interesting
be.
job. Maybe we
Sure.
should hire someone who can do that kind of work around here.
Are you going to have a house in your
Well, you had mentioned, when you were talking about the Rolling Stones, you mentioned that you enjoyed the Stones because of their substance, and I notice a lot of substance in Jethro Tull music. Is that something that you have to work to achieve? Is that just the way Ian is? You read the newspapers, you see what's going on, and you're moved by these things, or is that part of the job?
I think music and songs come from a number of different sources. Inspiration is an easy idea to believe in, and once in a while you do get those wonderful, gifted little moments of excited revelation where you say, that's a song, or it will be with a little bit of work. But most of the time it's sifting through ideas you've already half-formed, or memories that are perhaps very recent, sometimes very old, but you kind of, when you're in a songwriting mood, you're drawing from a lot of things that are already a part of you. And it is a work process which is a curious mixture of discipline and spontaneity. So you're applying a kind of craft, a skill level, to something which is very very nebulous, very, plucking these little ideas from your own memory, from your own field of vision, and then somehow making them into something that is a bit more real. And there's a lot of, the examination of your own psyche that goes on in songwriting. Sometimes that means that the end result is not one that you really want to share with people, so there'll be quite often songs that just don't get completed because they're too much a self-examination process and not really necessarily relevant to anybody else. And I think a good song is always that. It always is something that really is personal to the performer or the writer, but it's also something in which listeners can share. Maybe they don't understand the thing in exactly the way the writer or performer does, but they have a point of reference, and I'm not the Einsteinian universe where the observer is everything is not my idea of fun. I think that it takes two to tango, and if you're a music writer, there's got to be somebody on the other end who's going to play their part in what is the end result. Enjoyment is something that it comes from an active engagement with, in this case, entertainment. You can't just there's a terrible danger now, passive entertainment. I mean, the mindless hitting of the MTV button and sitting there and letting all this sort of glossy, 1.5 second sort of cut every 1.5 second videos hit you, with the odd glimpse of thigh and stocking to keep your pulse on the right side of normal. And it's too easy. Music shouldn't be that easy. It maybe shouldn't be as difficult as sitting down to grapple with a Beethoven symphony before breakfast. But it shouldn't be too easy. It's like a good book. It's not the book that's easy to read, that's fast to read. The good book is the one that you have to struggle with for the first few pages. They're the ones you tend to remember. Or they're the ones I tend to remember.
Right.
And I think that, people of inquiring mind enjoy the challenge of something as entertainment that pushes them a little bit towards meeting it halfway. If you could just sit back in your seat and let this thing wash over you in the sort of virtual reality sense of it just engaging you without you making any effort, then it's a cheap thrill. And cheap thrills are not the ones usually that we take with us to the grave. They're the ones that we just kind of forget about and need another quick fix of a greater magnitude the next day or the next week. So I'm a believer in making life just a little bit difficult for people who listen to our music, in the sense that it's got to be a bit of a challenge to their ears and to the way that they look at music. That doesn't mean I'm interested in making it high art. It's a very low form of art, but there should be a little bit of that crazy thing in there, that strange thing you can't quite touch that makes people make the effort.
Is there a Jethro Tull song that's almost too personal for you? I mean, a song that maybe almost didn't get on an album because it was too much of you in it?
There are lots of songs that haven't got on albums because of that, yeah. And so they are long forgotten. But there are a bunch of songs that didn't make it onto albums that I can just about live with. And they are the subject of a 2 CD set to be released right at the end of this year, which is about 40 minutes worth of what was a projected double album in 1973 that never got completed and released for a lot of reasons. Those tapes turned up, so people will get to hear a bit of genuine early 70s Jethro Tull, and it's luckily because of the intrinsic humour and light-heartedness of the music. It is actually quite listenable to even now. I find it quite fun to hear, but you know, it's not for everybody. And there's another 18 unreleased Jethro Tull songs on the other CD, which are from between 74 to 92, that just were, you know, basically completed songs that just failed to make it on the album for, again, many reasons. Just usually because they were perhaps too like something else that was already on the record in the same tempo or the same key or something.
Right.
But they're you know, pretty reasonable album tracks, and the fans know about a lot of this stuff because of bootleg copies and demos and things that have just found their way out there into the world. So they have besieged the record company for the last few years saying, when do we get to hear all this? And the answer is soon. But it's not my idea of the best thing to be doing on a rainy weekend, grappling with all this old stuff. It's just something you kind of do as a bit of an obligation, really, that it exists, and some people want to hear it, so we'll let them hear it. Then hopefully they won't get charged too much money for it. And I'm giving the songwriting royalties to charity because I don't want to be accused of raking over the dying embers of the fire just to try and get a new flicker of dollar bills, Deutschmarks, and pound sterling going.
Well, you always have kind of given back to your people. You've got the farm at home. Do you still operate the?
Oh well, in the industrial sense, yes. I mean, I've grown up and done my bit within an age of fairly serious and hard-edged capitalism. I mean, as a student, I was fairly left-wing in my views. But the reality is, you know, we had to work within that system that seemed to work best for most of our countries at the time, and rather than simply pay taxes for someone else to make decisions, I rather like the idea of trying to make some of the decisions myself. And I'm not wanting to be patted on the head for it, but I mean, I'd like to think that I, you know, spend a few $1 million of taxpayers' money as well as my own money in creating some degree of employment in a traditionally very difficult part of the United Kingdom. So, I mean, we currently employ about 250 people in the farms and factories, and we're just building a new factory right now. There should be another 100 people on the payroll by this Christmas. So, it's sort of important in the sense that if you're lucky enough to make more than your fair share of wealth within our system, then it's a nice idea if you can somehow turn a little bit of that back. Not in the form of handouts, in the form of creating the opportunity for other people to earn their own little bit of wealth.
Right.
And that is about job creation. But more importantly, it's about sustainable job creation. And that's the one thing I try to do, is to make sure that every job we manage to get going is a job that's going to be there, hopefully for life, for the person concerned. So
as opposed to the big mansion in Malibu, you decided to do something that has some socially redeeming value.
Yes, because I feel
you do have
guilty
a house
about
in
earning a
Malibu.
lot of money. No, I don't have a house in Malibu. I have a moderately large house in the south of England, not too far from London Airport, and I have another, you know, moderately large house off the west coast of Scotland. But most of the time I'm living in hotel rooms, earning my living, paying the rent. But no, I think it's a question of guilt. I mean, my own politics, I would still say probably a little left of centre, but I just feel that, you know, there is a certain amount of guilt to overcome if you are one of those guys who gets all the lucky breaks. And I've had way more than my share of lucky breaks. I'm still having them.
Well,
and I feel guilty about it. So I feel it's not a question of doing good. It's a question of actually just getting some of this load off my back, because I don't want to be... I can't take the money with me when I die. You know, so it's much better to be putting it into a form where other people can derive something from it. And it's a social thing. It's about a social reality in a part of the country that means a lot to me personally. So.
Well, I hear a lot of that attitude in, say, Bungle in the Jungle. Maybe I'm misreading that song, but it seems to me that it's inviting those people on the beaches of Malibu to make an effort to do something like that. Maybe I've misread the song.
Well, Bungle in the Jungle is actually one of the... We referred earlier to the unreleased album from '73. Bungle in the Jungle was a sort of step on from another piece that was actually called Law of the Bungle, which, again, and you may get to hear this in due course, you know, was sort of halfway towards this sort of, you know, idea of the human jungle and people kind of playing roles almost as if they are jungle beasts. And I mean, it's not a new idea, but it was a fun idea to put in terms of what was then a progressive rock song. But the song, finally, with Bungle in the Jungle, the more refined version, was a fairly straight ahead and fairly simple, easy on the ear piece. And I mean, I think was probably one of those minor hits, even in top 40 radio over here. It's an okay song. I mean, it's not one of my favorites. It's not a very deep or significant song. It's a bit of fun, but sure, I think there's a social reality to everything we do. Some entertainment is just for fun. It just doesn't beg a question. But other songs, like the song Aqualung, I say that noticing a copy of the album cover in front of you there, that pause for later edited cutaway. I mean, that particular song is, again, it's not one of my personal favorite songs, but I think it's a good song. It's a good Jethro Tull song, because the subject matter is something real. It's not about 1970 or 1971. It's a social reality, a problem that was there then, is there now, and will still be around in some form in 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. There are still going to be homeless people who are something of an embarrassment to us, because we don't know, either on a personal or a more grand social level, quite how to deal with that problem. And what I'm seeing about there is really more on a personal level. You know, it's the difficulty of reacting to that kind of a person with his hand out or her hand out, looking for, you know, for a handout, and sometimes, you know, the essential nobility and character of some of those people is something that makes you stop in your tracks and say, hey, you know, but for the grace of God, that could be me. That might still be me. Even now, that might still be me. I might get it wrong from here on in and end up, you know, in that situation. So there's those kind of, you know, those are the things that I think make a song a good song. Something that people can relate to, either because it's a love song that they kind of share, they feel, they know what that emotion is about, or it's something that is very real in the sense of being around them. But once in a while, they might stop and look at somebody and think, I remember that song, you know, and maybe it causes them to think a little bit more about something that they might otherwise just pass on the street and not give a second glance or a second dollar to. So, but I'm not interested in preaching or, you know, grand social messages. It's just if you can bring them in a way that's real, rather than lecturing people or instructing people, then it's a better thing to do than to not do it at all.
So what are some of your favorite Jethro Tull songs?
The ones that kind of invite uneasy bed partners in the sense of style and influence together for a night of fun. You know, it's great to take elements of, you know, classical music or folk music or jazz or hard rock or whatever it is, and somehow manage to weld them together. Perhaps never entirely successfully, but so you can only just see the joins. And so when you manage to do that, when you get that eclectic mix to work, it's a very satisfying thing. I mean, for instance, the song Budapest on Crest of a Nave is for me, a nice balanced piece of music that has a number of elements in it that flow fairly well, and in the course of 8 or 10 minutes or whatever the song lasts, I mean, it's not a too grandiose a piece, but it has some shape and some structure. It obeys the rules that I like to declare as rules of engagement when writing and arranging a song. And the subject material is something that's sounds on the face of it to be a very sexist and cold thing, but behind it is a lot of warmth and respect for an individual and her body. And it is actually, I mean, some people just kind of hear it once and think that I'm being, you know, a little overly sexist, but that's not the way it is. It's actually meant as a very respectful observation, albeit still in language which is, you know, I wouldn't say erotic, but at least it's leaning in that direction. But it's good to bring those elements of style together, and if you can get them, you know, as I say, to become even uneasy bed partners, but still interreact for you know, the course of a few minutes in song, it's a satisfying thing to do, because it's a difficult thing to do.
Are you a classically trained musician?
No, I'm absolutely not trained in anything at all.
Well,
I never learned to play music in the traditional or academic sense. No, I don't read or write music. I compose music, but I don't actually write it down in
You just picked up the flute and learned it that way as well?
Unfortunately, I did. Yeah, I picked up the flute when I was about 20. I was a late starter, and it didn't come with an instruction book, so I just had to try and figure out the ergonomic realities of this peculiar instrument. And by trial and error, you know, found out I could get a few notes here and there. And even at the time we made our first album, I mean, I was just literally just finding my way around the instrument in a very haphazard way. But having been a guitar player, I kind of knew what I wanted to play. It was just finding where these notes were on the instrument. But consequently, I actually learned it all wrong. I did the unforgivable thing of actually just making more or less the right noises, but by doing a lot of cheating, effectively, in terms of my fingering. And it was only relatively recently, I mean, a few months ago, that, in fact, when my daughter was learning flute at school, and I heard her playing something upstairs in her bedroom, not very well, and I just popped in and said, hey, you know, what you're trying to do is this is how you do that. She said, no, it isn't. I said, yes, it is, look. She said, but that's not right, that's not the right fingering. I said, what do you mean? She said, look, and she opened this book she was working from, and it had a fingering chart, and sure, I was all wrong, you know. she was right, but the way she was having to do it was more difficult, involving more complex fingering patterns. So I then had to leave to go off on some promo trip to Asia, and I had faxed to me in India the flute fingering chart, and so I spent my quiet hours between interviews and stuff trying to figure out what I should have been playing for the last 25 years.
Great.
And then I had a tortuous couple of months of actually trying to relearn, you know, how to ride a bicycle, you know.
Right.
But it's like for me it was then like trying to ride a bicycle this way, you know. You're going to fall off every few seconds, and I still fall off. Even in concert now, you will hear a couple of wrong notes, badly wrong notes, because I'm still occasionally just suffering that little flautist dyslexia when it comes to integrating the correct fingering. But, you know, 2 wrong notes in the context of a couple of thousand right ones every night is fine. People aren't asking for their money back yet.
It's a good ratio.
But I'm getting the hang of it, and it's made a lot of difference to me. I'm really enjoying playing the instrument because I'm holding it differently. My embouchure is different. The sound is, I can do the stuff that I've always done, but when I want to play with a much clearer, more vibrant sound, I can now produce that. And it's just some of the stuff that I have played over the years is a little tricky when you have to employ the correct fingering. And, you know, I'm still working on it. I'll get there.
That's amazing. I take comfort in that as I try and learn my instrument. Well, I know you got to get going, so why don't we just run you in the studio? You can say hello to our listening audience,
sure.
Invite them out to the show tonight.
Should we get a plug for Night Rocks? Watching Night Rocks. Can I just say intro?
Yeah, how do you want to do that?
Watching Night Rocks.
Yeah, you got tape rolling in here?
Yeah, it's still going.
Okay.
Just that.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ian Anderson of
Okay,
Jethro Tull,
right.
and you're watching Night Rock.
Hi, this is Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, and you're watching Night Rocks.
Dude, I got one question, you know, in
Yes.
your interview that you're looking at.
How do you relate European perceptions, people's perceptions of music, and people in the States? I noticed you're into working a lot with people, and you mentioned some stuff about MTV. I mean, how do you feel the music
Well,
here in the States?
a few years ago, every hotel room seemed to have MTV in it. I haven't found MTV on this tour so far in a hotel room, whereas it's very prominent in hotel rooms in Europe.
Is it?
MTV it is MTV Europe, which is slightly different programming, but it's pretty popular over there. I mean, here it's maybe just a little bit on the wane in the sense that they have, as people are obliged to do in every kind of entertainment, the demographic is very, very focused. And that's really a bad thing because people's horizons seem to, dramatically contract. You don't, for example, find out what you're missing if you don't get a chance to ever hear or see it. And so things become ever tighter in terms of style, and things are locked into all these tight categorizations, which doesn't really help with creativity. It doesn't help the kind of crossover, that cross-fertilization between different forms of entertainment, in this case music. So it's a little different. But European audiences are, I think, slightly different to the American audiences in the sense that they will appear, on the one hand, more reserved, not so participatory in their response. I mean, you don't get all the hoops and hollers and yeahs and whatever. They tend to be much quieter in the quiet moments. And as an acoustic musician playing in a rock band, I appreciate the option to hear what I'm doing. Sometimes American audiences get a little bit too carried away in those moments, making it difficult for me to sort of focus on what I'm doing. But on the other hand, an American audience is sort of a very warm and very generous audience, and I find it very, very necessary in my life to keep coming back to the US because of the spontaneous and very honest way in which people do react. The Europeans can be a great audience, but sometimes you really have to work a lot harder to draw from them how they're really responding to it. But again, as I said, it's not supposed to be easy. That's a challenge of its own. But maybe the Europeans see Jethro Tull more as an eclectic band with perhaps more awareness of the acoustic and more structured song side of what we do. In America, we're still perceived as a kind of a rock band who occasionally, produce a mandolin or something, and this was slightly different emphasis, really. So what we're doing here, for example, is more of a rock kind of tour, is more up and more, bigger. In some ways more direct and a little simpler. In Europe, there might be a few more acoustic pieces or more complex pieces thrown into the show. It just suits the temperament. But, we needn't just talk about music. We could talk about the European cuisine versus the American one. We could talk about all sorts of aspects of things that we enjoy to do. But that's what makes it all worth doing. People are different, and long may they remain so.
When you've been in Europe, one of the things that's fascinating me about people from Europe, the house can be burning down, or somebody's just been run over by a car, but no one seems to get upset. Is that something that very rarely see anybody from Europe get upset? Especially London, England, along those lines, it seems that...
Well, it's maybe just a sort of a defensive degree of reservation. People just don't like to, spontaneously represent their feelings. People are just a little bit more. I mean, don't forget, in Europe, we're not the pioneering spirit that made up America or Australia or a number of other places where, over a period of a couple of hundred years, there's this great sort of confidence, and people are groomed from birth to exude confidence. You look at American school children of a few years of age, and they are far more able to express themselves. They're far more willing to do so than most European children are, who will remain much more reserved, much more cautious when it comes to expressing their feelings with family and with friends. It's a different way of life. It's we come from a series of small warring nations, and there is necessarily not a distrust, but just a reservation when it comes to exposing yourself too easily. There's a lack of confidence, and lest that all sound like a negative series of factors, it also, of course, does bring with it certain kind of differences in manner and bearing and personality, where people's degree to which they're reserved will result perhaps in more refined codes of conduct, more specific ways of relating to each other, be it at mealtime or business meetings or what have you. Whereas in America, things are kind of much more, like I said about the audiences, people are much more expressive, they get on with it, they don't waste time, they get straight to the issue, which is very refreshing, but can be a little wearing sometimes when you know, like me, as a European, being in America for a couple of months on tour, then you're kind of looking forward to going back to the rather more even tempered level of existence that is the case in most of Europe. But not all, because of course, you know, we bear in mind the Spanish and the Italians and other volatile
God help
types,
if you go to a
then,
soccer
you know, we
match.
see it all there as well. But no, if we're talking Northern Europe, if we're talking the Scandinavians, the British, the Germans, and, you know, even the French, you know, you're talking about a degree of slightly more reserved behavior, which can be, I think, is very attractive to Americans. Americans love to be in Europe and feel that calm, that sort of deliberate, sort of rather controlled way of life, and it seems to fit well with the historical significance of different parts of society, with the architecture, with art, with culture, with theatre. It all ties together in a very kind of mysterious but very orderly way. And that's what is attractive, I think, to a lot of people about Northern Europe. It's what indeed attracts me to live there still.
So when you plan a tour, do you sit down and say, okay, we're going to be in America, we better get loud and obnoxious. Now we're gonna go to Spain, we're gonna have to be loud there, but, well, now we're gonna play in London, so we need to rearrange the show to fit those audiences?
The answer is a little bit yes, but it's not a question of becoming loud and obnoxious. It's just a question of, say, leaving out a couple of the more idiosyncratic pieces that might just not kind of click with a given audience, and so you substitute maybe something that's a bit more the thing that you feel they like to hear, or they might like to hear. We don't play the same songs all the time, we switch them around, and even during the course of a tour, you know, there will be substitutions and changes in the set, just to keep things a little interesting and fresh for us. And so, you know, there's a degree of change, definitely, from country to country, and according to the language, you know, it will affect the way I talk to people, the way I express myself to people. You know, it's going to be different in England, where it will be very conversational and very chatty, usually in a theatrical context, in a 2,000-seater theatre. I'm going to be very different to how I would be playing to, you know, 20,000 people or something in some, you know, South America or wherever, you know, where I don't speak any Spanish and they hardly speak any English at all, or very few of them would have any English. So there you're dealing with a different kind of equation, a different way of finding a balance between yourself, the band, and the audience. You can't rely on the linguistic niceties of cheerful or frivolous banter between songs. You've really got to kind of press on with it. And that in itself will probably create space for an extra song, because you take out all the chat and you find you've got room for another 4 or 5 minutes of music. But sure, it changes. It's just like I said, you know, depends who you invite. If you invite the Cohens for dinner, you're not going to be serving up roast suckling pig, you know, and just as if you play in Spain, you're not going to be wearing them down by some, you know, very careful use of English language in a song that might not have some immediate value to them as a piece of music. So you've got to kind of mix and match a bit, you know.
Are there a couple of songs that no matter where you play in the world, you cannot call it a night until you've played those songs?
Sure, there's about usually 4 or 5 of those songs that we always play. I mean, the Aqualung, But Thick as a Brick, Locomotive Breath. I mean, these days we tend to play Living in the Past in some guise or another. You know, I mean, I guess those 4. Bure, possibly from a stand-up album, you know, maybe 5 songs that would just tend to always be there.
Do you guys do a lot of rearranging of songs just to kind of keep yourselves interested?
In some cases, but there are some songs you really just keep them the way they were. They want to be, you know, they want to be true to how they're remembered, and they don't suffer rearrangement, or they do suffer from rearrangement. They don't work when you change them around too much, and we have tried. But there are other songs that it's really good fun to let them evolve and drift into another area, and that's one of the enjoyable things about playing some of that material, is that it does have, as pieces of music, it is intrinsically in the nature of the melody and the sort of basic harmonic kind of structure of the thing, that you can do different things with it. You can push them in different directions, and people still find them recognizable and hopefully entertaining, but they have the scope to be shifted. Emphasis is shifted, you know, over the years or over the tours. And that's good. As a musician, that's good to feel you've got some of those songs you can do that with.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We better move.
Run out and have some lunch. If we could get some autographs, that would be wonderful. That's why she brought me this. Yeah, I want to run you in real quick, and you can just kind of